Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm a project manager at Mural Arts Philadelphia in the Environmental Justice Department, and I'll be facilitating this meeting with Kyla Van Buren.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. I'm a Trash Academy organizer.
Thank you all for coming in. Welcome to the first monthly Reduce, Reuse, Reimagine Our Broken Waste Systems hosted by Trash Academy, a project of Mural Arts Philadelphia. In these monthly assemblies, we'll build collective knowledge around Philadelphia's broken waste system and then take collective action. We're excited to have this monthly meeting space to work together in coalition towards a more just future for Philly. You can go to the next slide. So here's the agenda for our first gathering. We're going to start today by getting oriented to the space with some meeting norms and meeting goals. And then my co-facilitator, Kyla, will tell us a little bit more about Trash Academy and introduce us to our first presenter, Paige Scott Cooper, a Trash Academy leader, who will tell us about the true cost of plastic. And then we'll hear from Nick Esposito, who will tell us about Philadelphia's failed recycling system and some alternatives we can think about. While these two presenters are speaking, we encourage you to please write any questions you may have in the chat and use it as a knowledge building space. After the presentation, we'll come back together, take a few questions that come out of the chat and hear some answers from Nick Esposito about those questions. And then we'll go into 4 separate breakout groups, each led by a Trash Academy facilitator, and discuss what we heard and learn more together. Today, we are sticking to a 1-hour schedule in response to the priorities and feedback we've received at some other gatherings. We'll send out a short survey following this meeting, which you can use to express whether this amount of time is appropriate or if you prefer these assemblies to be longer in the future. You can go to the next slide. So here is some of our meeting norms. We've established a few meeting norms in order to ensure everyone in the meeting feels safe, comfortable, and heard. The first is that no one knows everything and together we know a lot. This is a collective space for growth and knowledge. The second is let's be generous with our grace, make space for collective growth. The third, move up into listening, move up into speaking. And the fourth, what's said here stays here, what's learned here leaves here. So please try and keep these in mind throughout the meeting and in your breakout groups as well. We can go to the next slide. So to orient us to this meeting, we've developed a few meeting goals. You'll hear these meeting goals kind of ring through each of the presentations and questions presented in the breakout groups. We also want to invite you to use the chat, as we said, in a way to share knowledge and questions throughout the time that we share. So if you have any relevant articles or information that you want to make sure you share, you can use the chat to do so. It's so great to be in community with other activated Philly residents engaged in the issue of waste, and we're excited to be using our time together to build knowledge and eventually take action together. So now I'm going to pass the mic over to Kyla, and Kyla will tell us a little bit more about Trash Academy, the project that came out of Mural Arts, and then introduce us to the first speaker for today, Paige Scott Cooper.
Okay, so before we get into it, we wanted to just share a bit about Trash Academy for those of you who don't know who we are. Trash Academy is a group of artists, activists, and community members working to understand and address trash in our homes and on the streets of our neighborhoods. So it's a project of Mural Arts. We've been around for about 4 years, and we really center creativity, collaboration, and environmental justice, encouraging those most impacted by the issue of waste and other environmental issues connected to it to engage in crafting and testing solutions. So at meetings and at events, of course, this looked different before the pandemic. Now it's mostly virtual, but we're hoping to go back, of course, when we can. We try to engage people all throughout Philly in thinking about their experience of trash and sort of playfully bringing people into conversation. So we use a lot of gameplay. You can see these pictures of a trash mobile that we open up and play different games with people, do community surveys, try to really prompt people to think about what they're experiencing related to waste in Philly and what sorts of creative interventions we could do to try to solve some of these issues. So the next slide shows that our hope for these monthly meetings is that we will sort of focus this month and then in May and June on 3 different major areas of waste in Philly. So today, of course, we're focusing on our recycling system. Then on May 17th, we're looking to have a meeting like this about incineration. So we've invited Zuline Mayfield and Mike Ewall. Zuline is with the Circle, Chester Residents Concerned for Quality of Living, I'm pretty sure the acronym is, and Mike Ewall who's with the Energy Justice Initiative, will be speaking about that topic. And then in June, we'll be focusing on Philly's landfill, and the speakers are to be determined, but we would like to invite people who are related to different materials in our waste stream. So hoping to get someone to speak about construction, about compost, or food waste, and various other major aspects of our landfill. So the idea for these meetings is that we want to build our knowledge together, like Emma said, and then hopefully by the time that we've done 3 in July, we can start to brainstorm what we can do to take collective action and build a movement around one or an intersection of these topics. So now I would like to introduce Paige Scott Cooper. Paige is a member of Trash Academy as well and worked a lot on this plastic bag implosion project that you'll see a part of. We wanted to share some parts of this implosion because we thought that having a foundation of plastics and plastic waste would give us an idea of sort of the scope of waste that we're dealing with, and help to open up the conversation about dealing with that waste through our recycling system. So about, I guess 2 years ago, Trash Academy started to engage in a plastic bag awareness campaign. We wanted to prompt people to really think about single-use plastics, think about the number of plastic bags we actually use, and the impact that those have on our health and on the environment. So from soil and drinking water contamination to asthma and cancer to climate change, plastic bags have so many hidden costs. And Paige is going to explore some of these, and even though it's about plastic bags, sort of make these larger connections to the different systems that influence plastics. So Paige can go into it a little further, but an implosion is an exercise that was invented by a professor named Donna Haraway. And we used this implosion exercise to use her prompts, these questions about what materials are used to make plastic bags, where do they come from, where do they go, what is their history, what are the political and economic systems that influence them. And we thought that this could be a nice introduction to Nick Esposito's presentation, which will come afterwards, and he'll go more deeply into Philly's recycling system and the aspects of that. So yeah, this is just a picture of our implosion. We'll drop in the chat where you can see this more in depth and also see the facts on the back on the Trash Academy website, and how you can also see our full webinar. But without further ado, Paige, do you want to take it away?
Yes, I will. Hello, everyone. My name is Paige Scott Cooper. I've been a member of Trash Academy for 5 years now. And I'm very excited to be talking to you all today. So if we could go to the next slide, please. I'm going to be talking to you guys about our implosion that we did last year. It's been an entire year, which is crazy. But I'm going to just be talking about, I'm going to be reviewing a few of these slides from our slideshow for it. So the first slide is no such thing as free bags, the true cost of plastic. So we'll be reviewing the parts of our plastic bag implosion that are relevant to this topic of the Philadelphia recycling system. In Trash Academy, understanding more about plastic bags was an attempt to understand more about single-use plastics altogether. And for a long time, we have noticed that it's single-use plastics that make up majority of the litter that we see on our streets. And that's also a huge part of what's holding back our efforts to recycle efficiently. So now we're going to talk about the material dimension. The material dimension was one of the dimensions that kind of just kept going for everything. It kind of was like the basis that connected everything all together. So we asked where plastic bags come from. And we found that oil and natural gas are the primary materials used to make this. And this is true for all plastics. These fossil fuels are extracted from deep in the ground through oil drilling and hydraulic fracturing. Next slide, please. And speaking of, we learned about fracking. Fracking is particularly relevant to Pennsylvania because there are 7,788 active fracking wells in the state, and it's caused a a number of environmental and health issues. And after it's fracked, natural gas is carried from fracking wells through thousands of miles of pipelines and plastic production facilities. And this is why, along with fracking wells, pipelines and plastic plants are always being constructed around the state. So basically, from production to disposal, plastics are really personal to Pennsylvania. Um, Next slide, please. So most recycling systems can only process thicker plastics like milk jugs and water bottles. Even though this has always been the case, the plastic industry has created this recycling number system, as I'm sure you guys may have seen, the ones and the twos, the threes, the fours, the fives, the sixes, all on the bottom of these plastic containers and plastic products, make us believe that it's recyclable, but not everything is as it seems, which this video from PBS Frontline series, it's going to help illustrate that a bit more.
This is classic when a lot of Americans do this, like what you're doing right now.
Yep,
we
that's
flip
right.
it over.
Yep.
What are we looking at?
At the bottom of all of these plastic containers is this little chasing arrow, the little recycling symbol with a number. And the number, there's some words. It says 1 PETE. This package here is technically recyclable. You could recycle this in a lab.
Okay.
But it's not economical to recycle it given the current economics of recycling.
But if it's not happening in Oregon, it makes me wonder what's going on in the rest of the country.
Yeah, I would say that this package is rarely recycled in most parts in the country.
Yeah.
Can I give you another example here?
Yes, please.
So let's take a look at these blueberries.
Okay.
This is classic. And if you turn this over, you see the chasing arrows. On the bottom, it says 100% recyclable. There is no program in Oregon that wants this in the curbside mix, but more than half of all people that live in the Portland area believe this belongs in the curbside container.
Well, it says it's recyclable.
It says it's recyclable. It has the recycling logo. It's very confusing to a lot of people.
This confusion about what can and can't be recycled and where plastic ultimately ends up is no accident. Over the past year, we've been investigating the plastic crisis and found that many of the problems we face today were set in motion decades ago by the very companies who make plastic in the first place.
Great. So as that video just illustrated for you guys, the number recycling system is a scam. Next slide, please. Yes, so the number recycling system is a scam. Usually the ones that you are allowed to recycle, the types of plastic that you are allowed to recycle are the ones that are in one that say ones and twos. And it is not that you cannot recycle these, it is just that it is not economically feasible to recycle the rest of them, so they don't. So that brings us to this fact, which is 91% of plastic is actually not even recycled. And that's what most people don't know because of the deceiving number recycling system and just a lack of general awareness. People put all sorts of plastic in their bin that actually can't be recycled. Materials like chip bags, straws, plastic forks get sent to recycling centers and they clog up the city machinery. And every time this happens, the process is slowed down, adding to the city's cost for machine parts and labor. Next slide, please. But of course, it doesn't just stop there. We also, digging in further to the material dimension, we also started seeing correlations between Philly litter, poverty, and public health. And And as you can see on these indexes on the screen, the highly darker areas are the ones that correlate to each other. And this is showing how Philly litter, poverty, and public health all correlate to each other. And this is due to a long history of systemic racism. Litter, poverty, public health, gun violence, and other harms disproportionately impact communities of color again and again and again. And we see examples of environmental racism all the time. When you see littered vacant lots in these neighborhoods, and green vacant lots in other neighborhoods. When you see waste incinerators in these neighborhoods and not an ounce of what looks like any pollution in other neighborhoods. This is all due to environmental racism. And going even further into the health issues, next slide. Going even further into the health issues, it makes sense that the litter and neighborhood health maps look the same because plastics have a negative impact on both our physical and mental health. In fact, 17% of floatables in Philly's waterways are plastic bags. And that basically means that when you are drinking water, you're usually drinking plastic. We are also breathing plastics because in those waste incinerators that are in our neighborhoods, those natural gases, those gases that are being released in our streets is what we are breathing. And this is why addressing our endless consumption of plastic and figuring out how to improve our recycling system is not just an environmental issue, it's a health issue as well. And like COVID, these health issues disproportionately impact Black and Brown communities, as you have seen. And while we're on the issue of how these issues impact Black and Brown communities, next slide, please. The US actually exports plastic waste to poorer, predominantly non-white countries. Unable to deal with our own trash, we annually export 1 million tons of plastic waste abroad. And that makes one person's home into another person's wasteland. They should not have to support the consumption of wealthier, whiter countries like the US, for example. And in 2019, which I'm sure you all may know, China decided to no longer accept recyclables with more than a 0.5% contamination rate. This had a huge impact on our recycling systems in the United States, including Philly, which had a 15 to 20% contamination rate, and it just became no longer acceptable. There is a statistic that says global plastic production is expected to double by 2050. As production and consumption increases, we can't keep expecting there to be other places where we can send our plastic trash. And can we go to the next slide? Thank you. And that's of course not all. Diving into this a bit more, we started figuring out that the corporations have a big part in this as well. It's not just, it's kind of like what they want you to see. And that's what was so interesting about the implosion and doing the implosion activity, was that there was so much more underneath the surface. As you may know, the city of Philadelphia used to make money from recycling, but in 2015, recycling plants actually began to charge rather than pay for collection. The cost of recycling is determined by the price of fossil fuels. To put it simply, if the fuel is expensive, it's cheaper to reuse plastic than to make it. But if the fuel is cheap, reusing plastic isn't profitable. But these markets are heavily influenced by corporate and government powers. All the major oil and natural gas companies also own plastic companies too, and they're receiving huge amounts of government funding. And a lobby legislators to push for more government funding and to weaken environmental and public health protections. In fact, it was the lobbying of a group of plastic corporations back in the 80s, which pushed for the numbering scheme of of a recycling system in the first place. Next slide, please. So because of, and it's not just the corporations, it's definitely the government. Because of hidden contracts and legislation, most people like you and me, we don't even realize that the US government is funding the fossil fuel industry. In fact, it is said, the statistic says that they are funding them with about $600 billion per year, which is about $2,000 for every American. Now ask yourself this question. If you wanted $2,000 of your tax money to go to anything, would you say, what would you put it towards? Because I'm pretty sure 99% of us would not say, yeah, let's put it towards the fossil fuel industry. Huge government contracts are sustaining this industry. This is allowing us all to use oil, natural gas, and plastics at a much cheaper cost than the market would actually price them. Is it good that we're using it at a cheaper price? Or is it not? Because regardless of us using it at a cheaper price, next slide, please. Where we ultimately pay the price is in the cost for healthcare and environmental damage. So even though this presentation has been about plastic bags, we thought it may lay a bit of foundation about plastics in general, since these aspects of the production, disposal, health impacts, economics, and politics are all relevant to all types of plastics. And we thought it would be very important in general to just bring up, because plastics are a big part of the litter that you see and a big part of what's not being recycled. We thought that sharing this information about plastics might help to ground us in the reasons we must address our consumption and disposal of plastic, and what systems and forces are at play behind the scenes that most of us don't even realize. Now Nick will present more about the Philadelphia recycling system itself. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you, Paige, for that beautiful and very interesting presentation about plastics. I always learn a lot every time I hear it. Yeah, next we're going to hear from Nick Esposito, who's the former Zero Waste and Litter Director for the city and the current head of cities at Literati, and also a big fan of mural arts. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm a big fan of mural arts, worked with you guys a lot in my former role as Zero Waste and Litter Director, and really excited that you guys are doing this series. So thanks for keeping this this learning space going. And thank you so much, Paige, for that great priming and introduction, and the great work you all did on the plastic bag ban work, and then also on the implosion. So that's really great. So I'm here to talk about today Philadelphia's and the US's broken recycling system and alternatives. And actually, right before I got on this talk, I was looking at the title slide on this, and I just said Philadelphia's broken recycling system. And you had to add the US's because I think we also have a very broken system here in the United States as well, and they're intertwined. But the problem that I've seen is it's not connected. It's disconnected, and that's what's really been leading to this broken system. I also want to say, when we talked about like failures of the system and broken and things like that, these are charged words. And I definitely want to open up to, my colleagues and people who still work for the city, from the sanitation worker who picks up your recycling, to other people who are trying to work on policy, trying to work on introducing things like compost, from many different offices throughout Philadelphia. This isn't just like one group of people's problem. I do think there's a leadership issue here, that we need leadership to put us on the path for the better direction. But this is a systems problem. There's a lot of things that contribute to it, why this problem is happening. And I just wanted to kind of lead with that. So basically, just to kind of start, I would say, where I've seen a lot of issues with, Philadelphia and the US's recycling system. And one, again, I don't think there's any word for it than broken. I mean, going on, especially as COVID has showed a lot of the issues that our society is facing. Another one is what's happening in our trash system. Every day I look at Waste Dive, which is an industry magazine. I see another group of cities that have canceled their curbside recycling programs. Again, and this is not the sanitation workers' fault. This is a systems problem. When I look out my window and every other week I'm watching my recycling just go into the trash because the trucks are behind and they can't keep up, that's a problem. So really, where it comes to is the funding that we've had for this. Our sanitation, or when it comes to materials management, sustainable materials management, it has truly been directed and funded by sanitation systems and waste management. These are the people that own the landfills, own the incinerators, and are just responsible for picking up the trash and the recycling and taking it to places. And where that's where the funding is going, it's not really opening up the changes that we need to have more innovative ideas. And again, there are plenty out there. There's a lot of really exciting stuff that is happening around the country right now. I work for a startup myself, but knowing how it is to fund startups and get money, it's really, really hard. So the fact that we just need new funding mechanisms, we need to see where the money's going, and we just need better standards on how to connect and interconnect this both nationally and even globally, and then down to the local level is really what I get into tonight. So the best way that I describe like how recycling works at its essence is this idea of process plus market equals recycling. You can't have recycling unless there's a process to actually do it, and then a market to send the materials. And I had courtesy of TerraCycle because I heard this one day when I was up at TerraCycle, which is a really innovative recycling company. They have a nice program called Loop, which is a reusable container program for goods that's happening worldwide now. And that's where they said, that's how they broke it down. You can go to the next slide. So the first process problem that I'll have is on collection. Again, it's when you have these larger organizations like a big government and then a big waste management company, they try to tend to look for simple solutions. So the first problem with this in the process is the collection. So you see this kind of graphic, I thought it was a really good one, of all of these materials, everything you have can go into this one blue bin. It's the magic blue bin. Everything goes inside of it, except plastic bags. Don't put that in. A few no's, but all these materials. And then it gets picked up by one truck and it's sent to a MRF, which I'll talk about in a second. But the reason for this happening, again, it comes from these big, clunky, bureaucratic institutions that it's very cost heavy to have many different trucks going and picking up recycling. Now, in essence, there was a success here, right? When people used to put their paper and then their cardboard and then their aluminum and then their plastic and their glass, they separated everything out separately. The amount of trucks that you would have to run around a city to pick up everybody's recycling was not economically feasible in the system that we have right now. So the solution was, we'll just put everything in one truck and we'll send it to one place and we'll sort it. Again, that was a major mistake because of the amount of contamination you come in. You can go to the next slide. In the sortation systems. So Paige, thank you for queuing up this idea of the ones, the twos, the threes, the fours, the fives, the sixes, and the sevens. I love 7. That's my favorite one. It just means other. It means any type of plastic you can possibly have. And how these labels got on the bottoms, and they kind of showed that a little bit in the Frontline documentary, is there's a process for this. Somewhere in a laboratory, you can process PET or high density polyethylene or low density, number 4, or even other, whatever that may be. Well, just that there's a fact that you can do it, that allows to say, okay, this material can go through this system. So it's really, there's no law that says you have to put these on the bottom of these. The plastic companies have all band together to put them on because, again, as the Frontline documentary said, it lulls people into a false sense of security that these are recyclable. So then they throw everything into their blue bins. The other thing that's really interesting, and if you look really closely at some materials, there were things that said like, this is recyclable, 100% recyclable, recycle this near you. Well, some products don't have that on there because they can't make that claim, because the only way they're allowed to make that claim is if there's actually a process somewhere in the vicinity of most major American cities. So they have like a calculation. It's like if 60% of the population has access to a place where you can recycle polystyrene, which is styrofoam, then all of a sudden you can say, okay, it's recyclable and all these good things. So there's a whole problem with how they put this on the bottom, and it leads to a whole issue of sortation. And it doesn't really lead to, is there actually a market for this material? The other thing on sortation too, I just wanted to touch on is something like glass. Glass, you would think, and I remember one time sitting down with my European colleagues, which I'll talk about in a second. And when I explain how glass is collected in this country, everything into the same bin, it all gets crushed up in the truck. It's got paper mixed into it. It's got plastics mixed into it. And when it goes into what we call the MRF is the material recovery facility. It's a really incredible facility when you really think about it. All of these different geometry and physics to try to sort paper this way. They use magnets to collect the aluminum, all of this different stuff that they're trying to put to more technology. But the fact that when the first bit of glass goes in and gets crushed and falls through the cracks, it's so contaminated, you can't actually pick it up and take it to a facility to have it clean enough that you could actually turn it into new glass. People who from European facilities that they do segregate the glass, get segregated pickup on a whole citywide level and take it to be processed, they were flabbergasted that that's the case. You go to the next slide. So with all these issues of the process issues, it really messes up the market issues. So remember, it was process plus market equals recyclability. Well, one is if you could even get the material clean enough to actually turn into something else, which is a challenge in itself, the way that we collect, the market still doesn't have supply and demand run into it. So, this was a fun graphic that I saw around plastic milk and juice bottles. It makes plastic lumber and decking, play sets, plastic detergent could make a container, stadium seats. How many stadium seats can you make for everybody who's doing their laundry every week in this country who have to use these bottles, right? We have so much of the supply of single-use plastic, even if we turned it into all the plastic lumber and decking that we wanted to, or all the play sets, or all the stadium seats that we wanted, you still would have way more product, way more material of all this single-use plastic than what could be feasibly turned into these products. So there's really no supply and demand thought out to it. You go to the next slide. But as we're starting to think to what we're calling a circular future, trying to create circularity. So if those of you don't know what this, the idea of a circular economy, circularity is, this is from the MacArthur Foundation, which is a big, group that pushes this forward. And it's this idea that everything is cyclical. Everything is going to have a cycle that will go back into the manufacturing systems. So this is a really complicated system, right? The system that we have now about just picking up the material, taking it, getting it processed, and moving forward cannot support this system. So we have to change some of our habits. We have to do something different to be able to fund this system, to be able to actually organize this system, to get away from just this idea of the waste management companies picking it up and taking it and just getting it, as Paige said, out to China, which was the easiest thing that they could do until that was cut off. We need something different. So one thing I wanted to talk about tonight, go to the next slide, is extended producer responsibility. Now, I know this was a big topic that came up, and this was something that Mural Arts had asked me because I have a little bit of experience with this. So the concept of extended producer responsibility does three main things. One, it's a mechanism to set and enforce recycling standards across industries nationally. So it's able to kind of put forth, a system for how you can kind of try to manage market, try to manage demand, try to manage supply to really make things truly recyclable in an organized level on many different levels of government, industry, and even down to the local level and innovators. The second one is it shifts the cost of processing materials. So the disposal, recycling, composting, and reuse from the consumer to the producer. Like we said about how this is all getting funded through waste management, your taxes is what really funds how these materials are processed right now. You're the one who pays for it. So not only do you pay for the product in the first thing, then you have to pay for its disposal. This shifts the cost to the producer who actually produces it. They have to pay for the disposal. If they're going to make these products, they have to be responsible for the end of the life of it and actually funding it. And then finally, putting packaging fees on producers in order for market forces to force them to reduce packaging. Now, I will admit that as EPR has gone, it has not, it worked exactly how it needed to really reduce the amount of packaging that's going in. We do have a lot more plastic packaging that's being created, but in the places where EPR is trying to work and really trying to do it on their local levels, they are having some impact on these global companies like shoe companies, clothing companies, things of that nature that are putting this material in. But again, it's redirecting where the money's flowing and how the money can fund new ways. I'm going to go through a couple of experiences that I've had of different places where I've seen it. Next slide. So the first one's in Japan. So Japan has what's like a national EPR. So in 1995, they established the national, the recycling law, basically, for how recycling was supposed to work, the different methods that they were going to use, the different targets they were going to try to hit. So this is what a PRO is, a producer responsibility organization. They are the sole one for Japan. It's the only one, it's national. So they have, as again, I'm being very honest about some of their claims. They said 84% of plastics is recycled. 23% is actually recycled. They've been incinerating some of the rest and calling it recycling. Now they were kind of set the task on that, and the country of Japan was being critiqued. So now they've committed to a 40% reduction in incineration. This would be impossible to do. Again, if there wasn't this kind of more like national impetus for how they were holding themselves accountable through laws to reduce how much incinerations were. I love the work that I've seen so many people do to try to shut down incinerators in the United States, but going incinerator by incinerator is going to be very time consuming, very hard to do. If we had more national standards for how we can deal with this, that's what we can do. You can go to the next slide. And again, this is a picture of when I was in Japan. They have an actually kind of whole sector of their city in Tokyo. It was like MGM Studios for waste management. This is a sector between these two buildings. One was they were doing outdoor composting, and then on another site. And then when they had some like extra material that was coming in, or they needed to process it in a different way, they had one that was actually making like animal food, like dog food or something. And they had another one for anaerobic digestion. But they had this whole kind of sector of interdependent businesses that were actually funded by the government from all this money that's coming in through the extended producer responsibility to fund this mass variety of waste management, from recycling to composting to even reuse. I was blown away when I saw they actually have these collapsible orange containers that they give out to people in Japan, and the government, funded to do this, drives around in flatbed trucks and picks up as people put their bottles into these things. I went to the facility where they were washing the bottles and getting them back out for reuse. And again, this is funded by extended producer responsibility. Next. Another one is CANI. CANI is the Italian public-private partnership. So it was established by the Raunchy Decree of 1997. But it's a consortium, it's a nonprofit, and it represents 844,000 entities that covers recycling, reuse, and organics. They've committed to a 50% plastic recycling rate. And when they do this, what I think another great impetus of putting it nationally and having these standards set is that traceability is very, very important. Like in the United States, to Paige's point, we got all this recycling collected, we got it on these ships, we sent it over to China, and we said, it's being recycled. Look at us, we're great. Well, we didn't care what happened once it finally got over there. And what was happening was they were burning a lot of the plastic because they didn't need it. There was no market for it. CANI works to ensure that there's a market, has traceability to ensure that that recycling rate is accurate. Next slide. And again, this blew me away. This was something that, so CANI funds AMSA, which AMSA is the main waste management company. They've been around since 1913 in Milan. They have these key cards that not only Milan, but all of the municipalities around there, the residents have, that they can swipe the key card. It knows that you're living in that building. And then that's a place where you could put small electronics and other things. And they're actually taking some of them for reuse. So this, you couldn't pull that off in the system we have now because it's so disconnected and it's so kind of funded government by government by government within these small localities. And it doesn't have this kind of organizing principle, which allows you to do that at CANI. Next slide. And the final one I want to talk about was French-based, market-based EPR, which is CTO. And again, EPR stands for Extended Producer Responsibility. So this was established in France in 1992. It's one of multiple producer responsibility organizations in France. So France, rather than having just a national one like Japan or a big consortium nonprofit like Italy, they've got many different kind of almost nonprofits that are all being funded. So they can work on, they have 14 different EPR plans. So these are for electronics, furniture, textiles, all of these different nationally led regulations on how they need to get into reuse. And a beautiful thing that I saw is not only committing to a 50% reduction of plastic bottles by 2025, but a 10% reuse of packaging by 2027. Again, I'm really happy that you have things like the closed loop partners. You can go to the next slide, Emma. Closed loop partners, that is a big venture capital fund that is funding, bringing in funding off all these innovative kind of market-based solutions. But this is a nonprofit that gets paid by the producers who produce the packaging to go back into the country to then fund this type of innovation, being funded in a public-private partnership rather through venture capitalist funds. So again, there's a lot of great opportunities. You see that this is what they're working on: eco design, sustainable consumption, recycling, all these different things that they're doing in CTO. And finally, for my last slide, what does it look like for EPR in the United States? So right now we have Break Free from Plastic. It's the big legislation that is going to have like a national plastic bag ban that's being proposed, a national bottle deposit system where you get 10 cents for every bottle that you bring back. And then EPR is part of it. Now, again, I'm not representing Break Free from Plastic. I had nothing to do with the legislation, but there's a lot of very, very deep, long learning from people that have gone through this, have found success. And I think the United States can now add its piece to actually try to make better legislation to organize these. States are also doing EPR legislation, which I think is amazing. And now you have California. I was actually just talking with someone from California, a state senator's office that's trying to do this. They've introduced it in Maine. They've introduced it all over. And even here in Pennsylvania, we have a thing called the Pennsylvania Market Recycling Center. It's funded through the state. That comes from fees that are on every ton of recycling that gets processed. But they're trying to build more recycling markets in the state of Pennsylvania. Imagine if this was funded more by the industry with more money coming in. And again, not funded by the industry with industry control, but they're getting taxed. The money's being processed either through the state, through one of these nonprofit consortiums, or through another nonprofit that then can fund the money in. And again, it's not crazy. We do this all the time, right? Like, look at the National Endowment for the Arts. Look at like something like unions, right? Like, people pull money into these entities that then are able to kind of put the money back out to do good work. So again, this could fund market innovations, right? There's a lot of really great, innovative new things, even here in the state of Pennsylvania, that just need more funding. And it can't always just rely on foundations or, financing it themselves, or a nonprofit, or just getting, grants. To have money that is set aside, that the producers are being responsible for, to put it back in, I really think can lead to a more circular economy. An economy, again, that is a new way of doing business in this country. I shared this link before about, we can't build something like this in the economy we have now. We have to make a new economy. It has to be circular. And I think this is a good start to kind of put us on that path of redirecting where the money's going and flowing into a better spot. And that's my presentation. Sorry if I went a little bit over.
No, that was great. Thanks so much, Nick. That was such great information. So I'm going to transition us into our Q&A section. We were supposed to go out into breakout groups, but because we are a little bit over time, we're going to move into 10 minutes of kind of collective learning in this group setting before concluding this meeting in about 10 minutes. So this 10 minutes of Q&A, I have a few questions that I pulled from the chat that folks have been asking throughout the presentations. If other questions come up while Nick or Paige are answering any of these questions, feel free to ask them in the chat and we can just add them to this queue. The first question that came out of the chat, which I think is directed at either Paige or Nick, is, will the Biden administration's proposal to cut fossil fuel subsidies affect this issue of plastics in any way?
The Biden infrastructure plan?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Paige, do you have an answer to that? Do you want me to take?
I'm not actually sure.
Yeah, so I'm not an expert on like watching, but I do know from what I've seen with the infrastructure plan. Again, with the same thing that kind of came from the Green New Deal, right? It's not enough just to fund like roads and bridges. It's funding, like, there's like healthcare is put into the infrastructure plan, like quality of life, like different issues that, to Paige made that really good point at the end of your thing. It's not just about a plastic bag. It's about all of the health that goes into it. So I think there's something there. Also, I think Shari made this point in the, and Paige, you were making this as well, as like all the fracking that goes in to make the plastics that we have. Like, if we are to shift away, and not just, renewables, like all different types of energy production that shifts away from fossil fuel production, again, the industries are kind of limping along, trying to just make plastics and just single use explode. So they have some reason to pump this stuff out of the ground. But I guess I'm not an economist or anything, but my outlook would be that it still wouldn't be economically feasible to pump that much out to create plastic straws and sporks, right? Like, it's going to shift how we look at plastic. My view is that plastic is going to become a much more competitive material in the future, because we need it, like for things like, as at least now, like our cell phones, our computers, our medical equipment. Like, plastic does play a major role in that. So what do we want? Straws or communication systems and medical equipment, right? So we're going to have to make that choice. And again, it's a long-term kind of planning, but hopefully with the infrastructure planning, there is this thought being put into it on that level.
And I would still hope that it does make it in this issue, but at the end of the day, we also have to think about no matter what they are doing, governments and corporations, it also starts with the self-awareness, and just being self-aware what you can and cannot recycle and what you can do about it. There's something called terra recycling, which I just learned about maybe a year ago doing this Implosion, and it's where you actually get to recycle chip bags and stuff like that. So it's stuff like that. It's the little things and the self-awareness and just knowing what you can do that kind of makes this all a bit easier, and then makes you have to worry about whether or not that's going to happen less.
Sorry about that. We have to ask permission to unmute ourselves. So I have to wait, Victoria. Thank you, Victoria. We had another question In the chat that was, has EPR been successful in the past in limiting consumption?
In limiting consumption. So
Producing less plastic.
yeah, so again, I think that they're, you know, I'd have to look at the stats, getting prepared for this talk to kind of like look at like the exact numbers of like how much like plastics consumption, the rate in like a place like Italy or France as compared to the United States. But I think, again, that's a tricky thing because we are relying, as much as we want to rely on more local, you know, systems, and some countries do it better than others, you do have these global supply chains. And I think that we need to look at this on the global level because that's how the supply chains are working. And, you know, I was thinking this, I didn't say this in my talk, but it's like the amount of data and the amount of thinking that goes into getting you to buy a product and then shipping it halfway around the world compared to the thought of what happens after you need to get rid of that is mind-boggling. It's just so disproportionate, right? So as more kind of countries kind of get on to really shift this back onto the producers and make sure that it's state regulated, that it's nationally regulated, and then hopefully one day globally regulated, right? You'll have the standards will be set for how plastic is produced, plastic is used, and plastic is recovered, or glass, or whatever that may be. So again, I think it's something that we have to kind of keep pushing forward in a more kind of collaborative, internationalist kind of struggle, basically, to all work together, as opposed to all of these different countries doing things their own way. Because if they do things their own way, everyone's on their different pages, the way global supply chains are working right now, you're not going to like be able to get to that solution. So, you know, I think this is a good thing that people are kind of moving towards collectivizing these systems and really trying to look at this as a global issue and working together to meet these goals.
Yeah, that's a great thought, Nick. And this question kind of builds onto what you're already talking about kind of like the circular economy. But if we were to push this change, what are some tactics that we could try, and who would we have to influence and how? And Paige, I'd also be interested in hearing more about like what kinds of collective action and solutions you think are tactics that we could try as we push towards limiting consumption and building a more just waste system.
Would you want Nick to answer first or me?
Whoever wants to start.
Whatever, yeah. Do you want to start, Paige? Go for it.
Okay. The solutions. Okay. So the way I'm going to tell you guys the way I've been going about it. And then I can tell you more about what I feel, you know, would be good for you guys, but it's also subjective because everyone's going to do their own thing. So for me, just a little bit of background for me. Before I got in the Trash Academy, I knew nothing about the environment. Nothing. The most I knew was that you needed to recycle. That's it. Didn't know what was important to recycle. Wasn't anything. Once I got into Trash Academy opened my eyes to everything and showed me that the environmental issues we have is deeper than just trash. Once we started this plastic bag implosion and started to dig deeper into all of the different factors and all of the different things that play into it, it made me realize, because we can push, you know, the government, these corporations, anybody as much as we want, which we have. But, you know, like I said, it starts with us. So one of the things I started doing was I started buying reusable bags. I didn't even realize how many reusable bags I already have. There was a corner store on the way home from school every day when I was catching SEPTA. So when I was catching SEPTA, once we started this, instead of getting those little plastic bags, I would just put it in my book bag. I already had a reusable bag and just never looked at it as a reusable bag. The small things like that really opened my eyes to, you know, what I can do. And I started doing it so much, and I would not like yell at my mom, but I'd be like, well, you know, you have a reusable bag in the car, because my mom has a business and she has reusable bags as well. And she doesn't even realize, like, just like me, she didn't even realize, oh, I'm carrying these reusable bags around with me all the time. So I remember one day she came home from work. No, she came home from the grocery store after just getting off of work. And she was so excited to tell me that she used her own reusable bag. And she was just like, Paige, you'll never believe it. You'll never believe it. I'm like, what, Mom? Like, what happened? And she's like, I got my own reusable bags and I bought some from the grocery store. And she was like the biggest smile on her face just to tell me that it's like the little things you do now, it's impacting other people. So my point is more so about what you're comfortable with doing, but it's the little things like that. Because now my household, we rarely use plastic bags now. That's one less household out of the households in Philadelphia that are using plastic bags. Um, then we have why am I drawing a blank? Oh, then we have just the different things you can do with recycling as well. We can push and push and push these corporations and the government to you know, stop with the number recycling system scam. And like Nick was talking about with the introduced EPR, like those are really like good things. But one of the things I know I do is just educating myself. I had no idea. With this new education I found, I now that I've learned, I now, you know, look over the recycling in our household because I have a brother who's 7 years old. He still doesn't know everything, but just me educating him and educating everyone in my family, now even my 7-year-old brother knows a lot more than my 30-year-old aunt about recycling. You see what I'm talking about? So it's just a wanting of, it's just the want to be educated. Learning about TerraCycle, learning about what different, like where can these things be recycled, if any. Limiting consumption, that's a really good one. I had no idea how much I consumed before we started deep diving into this. And it would just be things that there was no point in consuming. For example, buying plenty of clothes before school starts, when 9 times out of 10 you're not even going to dress up for school all the time. You're most likely going to just throw in some jeans or some sweatpants and a t-shirt and just go to school because that's what you're there to do. You're there to learn, not there to have a fashion show. I didn't even realize I would find myself towards the end of the school year like, wow, I never even wore that. All the plastic bags that I would use to buy these clothes, put these clothes in when I bought them, and it was just thousands of dollars on needless stuff.
Yeah.
When the pandemic started and everyone bought and all the toilet paper on the aisles, like it's just an endless consumption, and we don't even realize how this consumption is impacting the amount of waste that we are creating. If every family could, you know, every household could consume a bit less, then we'd be on our way to decreasing waste production a lot, by a large number. In fact,
Yeah,
after the
thank you,
pandemic,
Paige,
I'm
for
not
talking
going to.
about that overconsumption. I just know that we are pretty limited for time, so I just want to
Okay.
give Nick just a second an opportunity to answer about some of the tactics we can try and who we're trying to influence in this collective action before we move to talking about our final meeting.
Yeah, I think Paige made a great point about, there is like, being educated, having like the resources, the doing, the things that need to get done. But again, I think Shari made a point on here is it has to be collected with regulation and like a larger system support, right? Like this whole idea that people create pollution, people can stop it. Like that's not true. The system creates the pollution, right? And we have to change the system. And I think that one of the biggest things is redirecting that funding. The fact that I saw some great things in there, some good friends of mine who I love seeing, like, Remark Glass, Rabbit Recycling. Like the fact that the city is paying like waste management $45 million a year just to tip, which means just like to pay the money to dispose at the landfills or at the incinerator, wherever they are. It's crazy. Like that money should be redirected back into these more innovative waste diversion systems that we can have, right? We should have more composting in the system, but we need that through regulation. That we should have more of these companies, right? But they have to be funded. And you saw what happened with COVID. I mean, my job was a casualty of it, right? They get rid of the zero waste and litter counting because we didn't have any tax money, which pays for this. Well, it shouldn't be tax money paying for it. It should be the producers that are making all of this trash paying for it to have it actually processed in a better way. So I think one is really pushing for that, especially on the state level, and then hopefully the national level. So I think that that kind of, advocacy is very needed. I think another thing though about how we get away from these is, I love this concept of like the just transition. I know that's something that's been kicked up a little bit with the Biden infrastructure plan. These people that are saying like, oh, you're going to stop fracking, you're going to stop, plastic bag production, right? Like when you look at the people who are working in those plants that are working, kind of drilling holes and doing that like manual labor, they're not like college educated white people, right? These are like a lot of times people of color. These are people who are making, even though you make pretty good money doing that, people who don't necessarily have, advanced degrees and things like that. So this idea that if we are to switch how we're producing, how we're kind of like the products we're using, thinking about, okay, what does that look like for the future of our economy, right? And I think that's something else that just does, I'm sorry, I'm getting a really weird light coming in here, that does need to be considered as well. So again, I think, these are big things that we are going to have to like organize around and lobby for, but I do believe that there is momentum going in this direction, and we can ride that momentum. And again, stop putting it on the people that need to fix these systems and putting it on kind of the society and the larger systems, but having the people drive it. I think we have something there.
Great. Thank you so much, Nick, for that wonderful insight about solutions and looking forward. Yeah, and we invite you to come back to the next meeting. I'm going to ask if Victoria can put up that last slide, and Kyla will give us a little send off for the last couple minutes. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Is Kyla unmuted?
Yes, I got unmuted. So yeah, thank you everyone. We're so excited about the amount of interest and engagement in this meeting, and we are aware that it was just 1 hour, really quick, a ton of information and not a lot of space for people to engage. So we just want to say that we're trying something out, and we would really love your feedback. We're going to send a survey out in the next couple of days after. I think we have all of your emails through the Eventbrite. If we don't, please write us an email to trashacademy@muralarts.org. You can also contact us through our website. But we just would love to hear from you about the ways in which you would like to engage in these sorts of topics. Like maybe in future meetings, we should do more than an hour. Maybe we should focus one meeting just on discussion, because I think we do want to, there have been so many great ideas and questions in the chat. So we just want to acknowledge that we want to address those things. And we'll try to follow up also on people who wrote questions that weren't answered. But yeah, so for the sake of time, we'll just say that our next meeting, like we said, is coming on May 17th. And at the beginning of this meeting, I definitely sort of butchered the description. So just to say that we'll be focusing on incineration, on Philly's incineration of both trash and recycling. Coventa incinerator in Chester is the largest trash incinerator in the nation. It's the #1 destination for Philly trash. We don't know the exact numbers, but since there is such a significant amount of waste that is being burned from Philly's waste stream, we really want to focus on this issue. Zulian Mayfield, who is with Chester Residents Concerned for Quality of Living, and Mike Ewall with the Energy Justice Network will be the two speakers, and focus a lot, on the logistics of incineration and the public health, air and water pollution, and overconsumption that incineration creates. So we hope that you'll join us for that and continue to sort of try to break apart Philly's broken waste system and ways that we can actually generate alternatives for a more just future. Okay, thank you all so much. I'm loving all the notes in the chat.